leading with a developmental bias. We actually get to cooperate with God in this whole process of helping people grow into the fullness of their contribution. Is that not an awesome privilege to be able to cooperate with God in bringing growth and good things from and with the people that we have the opportunity to be with? Now, some of you are parents, grandparents. Some of you have leadership roles in the Navigators, leadership roles in your churches and other places. These principles apply in all of these places. But we want to focus on what does it mean to develop the people that I am leading, responsible for, or involved with. Now, what I want to suggest is there are 4 components to leading with a developmental bias. Now, being the astute students that you are, you notice 2 of the circles are bigger than the other 2. That is on purpose, because the 2 absolutely critical foundational pieces, the first one is mindset, and the second one is intentionality. Mindset and intentionality. Then we want to marry with that activities and skills. And those are the 4 pieces that we're going to talk through for just a few minutes and some ways to think about those. First of all, we'll go to mindset. A mindset is that where your mind is. We have here to remember to think development all the time. Think development all the time. Now, one of the primary places that we do that is in the context of when we're together in meetings. I would like to suggest for you that when you have a staff meeting, that you weave 3 components together. The first one is your business or your tactical items, your operational issues. Secondly, a relational component, which is all about building trust. And then thirdly, development, which is about the growth of the individual people there. Now, some of you are sitting here thinking, well, we have a 1-hour meeting once a week. How are we going to build all of those things in? Let me just give you a couple of suggestions I've heard. If you have a 1-hour meeting every week, build 15 minutes over a meal, coffee, goodies, where people know they have an expectation ahead of time that we're going to be able to get caught up with each other, then move on into your details or your business items. You may want to consider over a period of time bringing a developmental piece into your meeting during that 45 minutes, maybe once a month or once every other month. But as the leader, you're thinking weaving those 3 all the way through. If you have a multiple day meeting, it's a little easier. You can build the chunks of your business, your development, and your relationship building time. You may be leading a campus ministry and you have a campus team that meets every week. Well, think of these 3 pieces being woven in over any period such as a month, that you want all 3 of those pieces built in. Now, if you don't build all 3 in, you can get warped. Nobody wants to be warped. If all you do is business, or all you do is focus on relationship, or all you do is think about developing into the future, then you're going to have an unbalanced approach to the mission or the task that God has given you. Think development all the time. It's a mainstay. We were just in a meeting talking about bringing people with you. Well, that requires a mindset that I want to bring someone with me in whatever I'm doing so they can observe me and then we can process it. But that will also require this next item, and that is intentionality. Intentionality means I am thinking and planning ahead for development questions, for developmental opportunities, and for giving feedback. I have to intentionally think forward on that, or guess what? It's not going to happen. Now, one of my favorite pieces in this material that we're covering is this idea of a feedback process that you can go through with your children, your adult kids, your teenage children, or with a member of your team that will actually enable you to draw out what is in another person's mind and heart and how they can change or do things differently in the future. 6 questions. They will change your life. Just get them in your mind and you can use them in all different contexts. So the first question is simply, what was your role, or what is your role or part in a particular event or circumstance? You just want to be clear on that. The second question is, what did you want to see happen? Quick story. When Vic and I were at Auburn University, Vic was the primary speaker, and he always knew I would give him feedback, asked for or unasked for, on his ability to speak on that given occasion. And there was this one situation where we got in the car, and I was thinking, oh, you didn't do this or this or this. Well, I had this little feedback grid in the back of my mind, and wonder of wonders, I said, well, honey, what did you hope to see happen tonight? Well, do you know what? What he hoped to see happen is exactly what happened. But if I had not asked that question first, not only would I have greatly discouraged him, but it would have been inappropriate to what he had intended to do. It's a very important question. Thirdly, what do you think went well? Now remember, you're in a feedback process, but it's very important to listen well first. And this is often one of the most difficult things for people to say. What went well? They automatically want to revert to, what should I have done differently? Or what do I wish I would have done differently? Which is your fourth question. What would you do differently? It's okay to think about that and talk about it. I found that you may need to keep pulling them back to that third question. Now, do you think you did that well? Or what were some of the things that you felt in that section of your talk or in leading that meeting that actually went well? Sometimes you have to keep pulling them back. The fifth question is, what did you learn? And then lastly, may I make some observations? Now, there are all different ways that you can run through these feedback questions. In the last 2 weeks, I had the privilege of speaking with a woman, giving her feedback and listening to how she evaluated herself in a recent message that she gave. It was wonderful. About 2 days later, I was talking with someone who leads a significant part of our work, and we were working through the same process. I was astounded all over again that the person who best can speak to how they did and what they did is very often the person who actually led the meeting or spoke the message or led forward in an entire initiative. My comments and giving feedback are very beneficial to them, but it is even better. Self-discovery is the best. And if you can ask questions and literally draw that out of someone else, you bless them, you value them, you build them up, and you know what? You actually see where God is at work, and then you can join him. It's really something I would totally encourage you to do. I found myself in the last couple weeks doing the same thing with our adult children. It's a magnificent filter to actually have a conversation that can bring development to a person that you've just observed doing something, or if you weren't actually present, you can actually enter in very well, apart from you making the firsthand observations. Intentionality. Thirdly, we talk about activities. These are things like learning exposures and opportunities that you can both instigate, create, as well as assignments that you can give to someone or linking them to resources. Now, I wonder if we were to think through what we understand from the Gospels of the kinds of things that Jesus did. I would imagine that Jesus had a mindset toward development. He was intentional in absolutely everything that he did. And you know, we read about activities that he orchestrated or invited the disciples and others into to be able to have development of their faith, development in their learning, and development in their courage. If you think about the situation where Jesus was sitting on the mountain talking to his disciples, and lo and behold, thousands of people gathered around. We have the Sermon on the Mount. That did not happen by mistake. The Lord knew this was going to happen. And then we see that not only in that circumstance were the disciples developed, but there was a ripple effect that comes to us even today in what he did. You think about the storms on the sea. You think about creating opportunities for his disciples to provide food. There were activities that were taking place that Jesus himself invited his disciples and others into. We can do the same. Fourthly, skills. Skills for developing others. This is very much wrapped up around question asking, but that's not the only thing. We can ask good questions. We can listen well. Think about the last time somebody listened well to you. What happened? Didn't you find it was pulling out more of you, more understanding as they listened well? There can also be a developmental dialogue that takes place. That's a skill that you can grow in. You don't have to stay where you are, and you may be thinking, I don't know how to have a developmental dialogue. You know what? Learn to ask 1 or 2 questions and then stand back and be amazed at how God uses you in drawing the best out of someone else. There can be both formal and informal formal opportunities to be with someone. You can create a very formal situation where you ask someone to do something and then you are with them and watch them and then give them feedback on that. But it can also be informal opportunities. You wind up sitting next to each other at an event and you talk together about what you're learning, or you're able to watch them in some other informal setting. Now, this skills for developing others. One of the things we want to do is give you 3 thoughts or tool sets in being able to actually improve in this whole arena of developing others. The first actual tool that I would like to highlight to you is the learning cycle. You can fill that in there on your handout. You know, it is a myth to say experience is the best teacher. I would submit to you that an evaluated experience is the best teacher. So when we think about a learning cycle, what happens is that you have an experience. You very often, if you're like me, you immediately go to the third part, which is the conclusions. You have an experience, you draw conclusions, and then you make some type of application, or you implement, or you move forward based on those conclusions. Now, the thing that we often leave out personally and in those that we are seeking to influence, develop, or lead is this reflection piece. Now, let me tell you an experience that I had. It's actually been about 30 years ago now, but it's marked me. In the context that Vic and I were in, we were serving in a campus setting, and over a period of 2 years, I had 3 women that were a part of our staff training. They came into my life, and all 3 of them left. And I will tell you, without going into detail, all of them left on a not very good note. So it's 1985, roughly. Now, my initial conclusion was this: I don't think I can train staff. I don't think I am a good staff trainer, because I did the best I could, and it wasn't enough, and they left. One of them actually walked away from the Lord himself. So as I was in the moment, if I had not been invited by the Lord and by others into a period of reflection, I would have walked away from staff training and decided to do something else. But there was a much broader work that the Lord was about in me in that. One piece of the fruit of that is that it was very, very deeply impressed on my heart that the Lord and the Lord alone transforms people. I have the privilege of cooperating with him. I can even be a trainer, meaning I actually deliver content to them. But apart from the transforming power of the Spirit, their cooperation and my prayers of faith, no real transformation will take place. Well, do you know, that has borne a lot of fruit over the years. But I would have initially walked away and concluded, I am not someone who can train other staff. And it would have been a wrong conclusion. But the Lord wanted me more dependent on him. Because I sat with him in a period of reflection, why did this happen? What things went well? What things didn't go well? What would I have done differently with these 3 individual women? I would encourage you to build this into your regular, consistent time with the Lord. It's hard to do it in 5 minutes in the morning. But after you've had an experience, and I don't want to say just negative experiences, but there's something about failure that invites some really good work of God. But make this a consistent part of your own time with the Lord in learning to reflect back on what happened in a particular experience, and then offer those who are on your team, who are your friends, family, or those you are leading. Invite them to take time to have a reflection period after a particular experience has taken place. we often skew toward condemnation as opposed to seeing the good things that God is about in our lives. Secondly, questions seem to be the key in order to help people reflect on an experience. I would encourage you, in whatever capacity you're in, to give people the gift of time and space. Build it even into your meeting schedule, that you can actually offer them a time or period of reflection. If we had longer, we'd actually do that now, even on what's taken place in your morning. But it often is the responsibility of a leader to be able to offer people the time and space to ask the questions that actually help them reflect. Questions were woven into everything that Jesus did. My friend Tom Yakeley tells me that Jesus asked 288 questions in the Bible that we have recorded. And guess what? He was never looking for information he didn't already know. So why then did the Lord Jesus ask questions? Well, let's just look through this passage and see if we can get a hint. Jesus came into the region of Caesarea. He asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Jesus already knew the answer to that question. And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." Then what does he do? He invited them to give information to one another as well as to him. And then he went a step deeper. "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Jesus was not looking for information. He already knew who they thought he was. He knew the internal workings of their heart, and he also knew what they were going to communicate to each other and actually nail down or seal in concrete about what they thought about him. There's something about being asked a question and that being pulled out of you. It brings clarity to yourself, and it also drives down a stake. Again, Jesus asked many questions, just as we can ask many questions. We have the disadvantage that we actually need information because we are not all-knowing. Grow in the art of asking reflective questions and giving those that you work with or lead the opportunity to ask them. I was recently with a leader, and we were discussing some material from his 360 review. And when all was said and done, he asked me the question. He said, "Is there anything else you would like to say?" And it was wonderful because I had the opportunity to think, okay, reflect, think, Lindy, what do you really want to say? If there was one thing that you wanted to add a punch to here on the end, what would that be? Now, I'm not going to say what I said to this leader, but he opened the door for me to make a comment to him, and my answer was, work at asking this one question. And I offered the question to him. So it wasn't that he needed to be doing much differently in his leadership, but it was learning to ask a pivotal question that could actually invite the growth, the development, and the ongoing good in those who he was leading. You can ask it in a team, you can ask it of individuals, but when you ask an excellent reflective question, or learn to ask a question of your team such that it helps you understand better what God is doing, it transforms the whole team, and it definitely can help you and the individual that you're inviting to answer the question. The art of asking questions. Probably, if you go away with just even one thing today, it is that to improve in the questions that you ask with those that you are working with, those you're leading, and in your family. A good question asker is often thought to be quite wise, actually. And you pay attention to that in the days ahead. That someone who knows how to invite the input, the thoughts, and the ongoing thinking of those around them, they will be deemed quite wise because they actually are listening to others and growing. Okay. What I want to also offer in this whole thinking about development are a set of questions. It's what everyone wants to know from their leader. Now, I have actually had people who have heard me give this presentation come up to me and say, I would like to ask you these questions. But it's for the person you're leading. It's what they need to know from you. The first question is, what is it that you want me to do? This has to do with responsibilities. Now, there are some people who we're involved with and they want to know how to do something so they can get it right. That's a part of this. But even more, what is it actually that you're asking me to do? It is very important for those we're leading and influencing that they are able to answer the question, what are the responsibilities you're asking me to do? Secondly, what does it look like when it is done well? What does it look like when it is done well? Now this gets into the expectation. Okay, you can say, Amy, I would like for you to set up a leader development luncheon in room 256B. Great. Amy can follow through on that. However, she would need to know from me, what would it look like if this whole thing unfolded in a way that was excellent? What would success look like? What is in your heart and your mind, your expectations? Thirdly, will you help me when I need it? Will you help me when I need it? That's the support that they need in order to do the job well. And lastly, will you periodically let me know how I'm doing? Now with some, I have found that you need to be a little more creative in knowing how to actually give them feedback. Many times we're involved with people long distance. And so being able to be available for support can be difficult. It was interesting when I was working with Rusty, he asked me the most brilliant question right at the start when I moved into being an associate director alongside of him. He asked me, he said, how often would you like to meet in order for me to be able to give you the needed input and feedback that's best for you? That was a brilliant question because first of all, he said he would be there to give me the support as my learning curve was so high. And then secondly, he was available not at his convenience, but with what I needed. Okay, this is for the person that you're leading. Now, responsibility dialogue, last set of questions, and I believe these are in your handout actually. In talking about a responsibility that needs to be carried out, it is important for me to know, what do you understand your responsibilities to be? So I am on a team with a number of other leaders, and it's one thing for me to have it in my head what I think their responsibilities are. It's a whole other thing for me to understand what do they think their responsibilities are. Very critical question. Number two, what will these responsibilities look like if they are done well? What do you think? I'm the team lead. What do you think it would look like when it is done well? Which of these responsibilities or expectations do you feel prepared to fulfill? What do you think you can do? What might you think is too much or that you can't? Where do you see some developmental needs for you in order to fulfill these responsibilities and expectations? In other words, it's okay to ask someone to fulfill a role or responsibility that's a little beyond them, but it's really good to have the dialogue. Now, in that, what development opportunities do you see for you? Where do you think God would perhaps grow you and ask you to develop in doing this responsibility? Number 5, what kind of feedback is helpful for you? Do you know, I found some people really have a difficult time absorbing feedback verbally. That's a real disadvantage for me because I really prefer to do all things verbally. However, some people, it really helps them if you would first give them written feedback or give them written input and then talk about it. Others, they need to hear it first, process it internally, or hear it first and process it externally before they're able to really settle on what you're actually giving them as feedback. Be sensitive to that. People are wired differently. So it's good for you to ask the question, what kind of feedback is most helpful for you? And then lastly, who needs to participate in this responsibility or dialogue with you? Who do you want to help you doing this? Now, all of those questions do not have to be asked all the time, but there may be 1 or 2 of those that you think, you know, I need to put that into practice today. Because what happens is in having an effective dialogue, you learn more, the people you're leading learn more, and you're actually better able to move the task or responsibility or whatever you've put your hand to forward. I hope what you're hearing as I'm concluding in my remarks is that in order for us to actually lead with a developmental bias, we have to draw out and pull out of others what we are expecting or asking or what they think. It's very, very critical. But they also need to have opportunity to interface with us so they know what we think and what our expectations are. We get to participate in this great work of God.